All right, welcome back, everybody, for day 6. Today, we're working on Space Invaders. So, yes, a classic game. I'm sure everybody has at least played it once. If you haven't, search it up on Google. You'll be able to find tons of variations, tons of different ways to play, and give it a go and see how the game works. But in the most basic format, the way it works is that you have a spaceship, and you have a bunch of different enemies, and you're trying to shoot the enemies with your lasers. So for me, my lasers are the stars. My spaceship is this blue block thing that I put together. And then my enemies are the circles. But when we get into the real code and start making it, it'll make a little bit more sense. Let's get started. So while making this project, we're going to be looking at the cloning function in Scratch, and we're also going to be looking at how to make objects interact with each other, as we previously did with our sensing blocks. First of all, what is cloning? Now, in case you've seen, Star Wars, the Clone Wars, maybe you don't really have a huge idea what clones are. So basically, cloning is when an object is recreated and looks exactly the same as the previous one, but it doesn't just look exactly the same, it basically is exactly the same. It's kind of like having twins, but multiple of them. So in cloning, instead of having, one being blue, one being red, one being black, you're going to have all the same blue, they're going to have all the same functions, they're going to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. At least in programming, that's how cloning works. It's the process of producing identical individuals. It's like duplicating something many times. And they've done this in real life as well with, I believe it was a goat they were able to clone. But cloning is more popular in the technology world, and that's what we're going to be recreating. So let's break down the game a little bit so it's easier for us when we actually start coding. In the game, as we know, we have the spaceship, which is this. And the spaceship isn't moving up and down, it's only moving left and right. So how can we make it move left and right? Pretty obvious, we can use arrow keys, right? The left arrow key will make it move to the left, the right arrow key will make it move to the right. But how do we make it shoot lasers? The lasers are separate from the spaceship. The spaceship is its own sprite, the lasers are its own sprite, right? And we can signal to the lasers to come when we click a specific button, like the space bar. Right, so we can use code blocks such as when right arrow key pressed to move left to right. We can use when space key pressed to shoot the lasers. Alrighty, let's go to the next part. The next, The next sprite that we have is our lasers, as I mentioned. So your lasers can be anything you want. Same thing with the spaceship. So the spaceship could be a rocket ship you find. It could be any object that you want to do. It's totally up to you. Your creative freedom here. For the lasers, I chose stars. You can just choose like rectangles if you wanted. The purpose of the laser is that it hits the object that we're trying to hit. It's like an arrow. And when it hits it, then that object starts to deteriorate, it disappears. So it's always moving up and down. It's not going to move left and right, it's only going to go up. It's not going to go down at all. It's only moving up, it's only moving on the y-axis. But because the laser needs to come up every time we hit the spacebar, we are going to be creating clones of the laser feature. Now, what block do I use to make the laser be at the same spot as the spaceship? So the thing is, if you have your spaceship and then you have your laser coming out, wherever the spaceship goes, the laser needs to be there. So to do that, we're going to use the block that says go to spaceship. Again, I'm giving you a crash course of the code here, so if it doesn't understand, that's okay. We're going to do it in the code as well, so it's going to make more sense then. And our final part of the game that is crucial for the game to actually make sense is the thing that we are hitting. So I chose to hit a ball. I chose to hit a baseball in the GIF that we saw. You can make the thing that you hit anything you want. You can upload the picture of the actual spaceships and enemies in that game. Or you could code it yourself or pixelate it yourself. But I just chose a ball. You can choose whatever sprite you want. And how this is going to work is that there's going to be multiple of these enemies. And these enemies can appear, they're going to appear all throughout the screen, right? You can decide to have 5 of this sprite. You can create a sprite that's a ball, create another sprite that's a ball, create another sprite that's a ball, for as many times as you like. But that means your code for one of the sprites that's a ball has to copy and paste into every single one of them, which is totally okay. It just looks a lot more cluttered. It's really big, right? Why don't we just slim down the number of code that there is into just one sprite? And we can do that if we decide to clone the enemy. So if we clone this enemy, the number of clones we want to make depends on how many times we repeat the action of cloning. So we put it in a repeat loop. Remember that when something repeats itself, it's going to appear on top of it. It's not going to appear beside it. So you're not going to be able to tell you've cloned it unless you actually pick at it and drag it. That is why we have to make sure that every time something clones, it moves over a couple number of steps. So I chose 80 steps. You can do whatever you like. And we have to remember that when the clone starts, we want it to show. So in the beginning it hides, but when it clones, it shows. This is what a cloning block looks like. Remember, to use it, you have to also make sure you have a loop around it. Otherwise, you're just going to have one clone, but we want to have as many as you'd like. And we have to make sure that when we hit it, this thing disappears. So right now, it's at hide. When the clone starts, it's at show. And then when it gets hit, it also hides again. So remember, that's in the looks section. Okay, so how do you clone exactly? Number 1, you go into controls and you grab create clone of myself, right? You have to select create clone of myself. That's the second last block in the controls section. And if we want to use it to make more than one clone, as you saw, we're just going to use a loop. So if you use the forever loop, it would just keep making clones forever and ever and ever. And some games might require that, but for ours, because we know we want a certain number of them, we could just use the repeat loop. Alrighty. The next part we want to look at is sensing blocks. So the most used blocks for us in this code will be touching mouse pointer and key space press. So remember, it's not going to actually touch the mouse pointer. It's going to touch the other object. And how is it going to know that we've touched the other object? Probably by comparing the colors, the coordinates, and the distance to the objects. So it's usually comparing lots of data in the background. Remember, we have to go to sensing, which is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sixth section in the code. It's the first one, touching mouse pointer, and the 6th one down is key space press. Alright, so let's get started into the coding part. If you haven't already, go ahead and make yourself an account. If you're not signed in, and then click create. So that is what I'm going to do. So here we have Space Invaders. Remember to title it. I put 3 because I am making this again. It's the 3rd version of the game. And as you remember, we have our codes on one side. When you bring them and drag them to our process area, they get processed. They get read by the computer, and they output in our output display here. So, what do you guys think is the very first step? Obviously, we have 3 sprites to work with, so we can start with any of those sprites. What we don't need is a cat, so we can get rid of Scratch the Cat. And now we're in the background. So because we're already in the background, the stage is highlighted here, as you can see. Why don't we just create or select a background first? So your backdrop can be anything you like. If you want to really keep with the theme of Space Invaders, you can make it Nebula, or there's another one, Space City. I'm going to do Space City. This is my background. So we've got our background. Check. Now we need to get our spaceship. To create the spaceship, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on choose a sprite, and you're going to click on the magnifying glass. If you would like to just use an already made spaceship, totally okay. You can click butterfly, you can select a cat to be your spaceship, you can do whatever you want. I believe they have a spaceship already here, or at least a rocket ship. Where is it? There typically is a rocket ship at least, and if you can't find it, you can always search it up. Yeah, you have a rocket ship, you can use that. Totally up to you. If you want to do it the way I've did it traditionally, then I want to paint. And we came to this again, this customization section. And we use this square tool. So not the select tool, you got the paint tool, you got the fill tool, the line tool, then you have the very bottom, the rectangle square tool. Stretch out a rectangle for yourself. Obviously that's really big. And also going to make sure that we pick a color that we like so we can fill it with anything we want. It's a nice color. And then we can stretch out another rectangle. So I had basically two rectangles laid on top of each other. I don't like how tall that is. Center that a little bit more. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we remove all the lines. Oops. So we're going to click on the select tool, click on this corner, and just drag our tool across. It's going to select the whole sprite. And what I want to do is I want to remove the outline. So I can click on this red slash over here, and it will remove the outline. So now it will look like one seamless block. The other thing I want to make sure I do is when I select the whole sprite, I want to make sure that it's aligned to the center. When it's centered, it just makes it easier to code and expect what to happen. Just make sure it's hitting that compass symbol in the center. You're probably wondering, how are we going to play the game if your spaceship is so huge? So obviously we're going to reduce the size of our spaceship. You can do so by, again, you can just select the whole thing and make it smaller. You can change the size here in the console. So if we make it 50, it's this small. Right, I could bring it down here, but that's still pretty big. We make it 15. Well, that's small. That's very small. Let's make it 35. 35 looks like a decent size. It's still a little bit on the big side, but 30 is good. So I chose to size 30. Again, depending on whatever your spaceship looks like, you can do whatever size you prefer. This is mine. And again, you can continue customizing this however you like. So if you wanted to like name this something, you could do that. And just go with your creative freedom here and write whatever you'd like. So this is my Scratch spaceship. And obviously, I'm not good at writing on a mouse pad, but that's okay. So this says Scratch, and I think my spaceship is complete. It looks so unique. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on Code. And as you remember, the spaceship moves left and right. So that's pretty easy to code. We've done that a couple times already. So we're going to start working on that. As we know, the most important block of code in this whole database is when green flag clicked, because that's the first block of code that will ever be used to make a program function. So in events, which is 4 circles down, we're going to click on when green flag clicked. Now, once the green flag is clicked, we want to set up the coordinates and the direction of our spaceship. So let's go to motion and let's grab go to. Now here it says x -3, y -143. Personally, I don't have a problem with that, but because I know at the very center on the x-axis is 0, I can click 0 to make sure that I'm in center. And it moves it over a little bit. And then you have y -143. would like to, you can move it further down, or you can move it further up. So negative 145, slightly lower. Again, totally up to you. But you do want to set the coordinates up. Now what we want to do is code our left and right arrow keys. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. And this variable is going to be the x position of our spaceship. So we're going to click make a variable, and we're going to call it spaceship x position. So XP for us. For all sprites, and click OK. It's going to show up here. It's going to show us 0 because we haven't really coded anything for the variable yet. Now, what we want to do is that when we move to the right, we want the x position to move to the right. When we move to the left, we want the x position to move to the left. So if we look at these variable blocks here, we can set our variable space x position to 0 in the beginning of the code. Now, if I decide that I want to change my space x position by 1 when I go to the right, obviously it's not going to do that the whole time in the code. We need a forever loop. So we're going to go to control before we set any of this up. And we're going to go to forever loop and drag it into our code. Now we're going to set our space x position to 0 right under our forever loop. And then to signal to the spaceship to go to the right position so that we can change our x position by 1, we have to do if the right key is pressed. So this is where we're going to put together a decision with a sensing block. So we have if blank then change space x by 1. Now what is the blank, you say? Again, we go to sensing and we have, remember this one, key space pressed. We're going to select key space pressed, and instead of being the space bar, you can if you want to. I'm going to make it right. So if I click the green flag and I click the right arrow key, it's not moving. But you can tell that the numbers here are going from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. This is kind of like a Boolean variable. But the important part is that it hasn't moved over yet. Well, we're not done yet, so let's keep going. Let's go to control, and let's grab another if statement, and let's do it for the other side, the left side. So we'll go to sensing again, and we'll grab key space pressed, put it in our hovered above the hexagon, drop it in, and then we have if left arrow key pressed. Then we want our variable, which is spaceship x position, to change by -1. And again, now it's not going to move, but I do notice that we go from 0 to 1 to 0 to -1. This is going to help us make our code very fluid, make the movement very fluid. So you're probably wondering, okay, how can we make it move already? So what we're going to do is we're going to grab another set statement, and we're going to put it, we're going to grab another set statement, and we're going to put it under the if. So remember, you have your forever loop, you have a set statement, you have an if condition, and then you have a change. Then you have an if condition, and you have a change. And now outside of the if condition, but inside the forever loop, you have a set space position to, and this is where we have a little bit of the operators section. Click on operators. We're actually going to multiply. We're going to grab our space x position and multiply it by a constant rate. So we're going to grab our variable space x position, and we're going to multiply it by 7.5. So now remember, it started at 0. It keeps going between 1 and -1, and then it becomes whatever the value is, 1 or -1, times 7.5. So it becomes 7.5, or negative 7.5, or 0. Now to actually make the movement happen, we go to motion, scroll down, and we grab change x by 10. So instead of 10, we're just going to change x by spaceship x position. Remember, because spaceship x position now equals to the spaceship x position times 7.5, and we can change it by that rate. Let's see what happens. Click the green flag, and we have a moving spaceship that's going left and right. However, it is going off the screen, but that's okay. We can celebrate the fact that it's going left and right for now. You're probably noticing that, we could have done this a lot simpler. There is in events, when space key pressed, and then change x by something else. So yes, we could do that, but that is a little bit of a level of code that we explored in our previous projects. But now that we're becoming more advanced, we can use more complicated algorithms because it's going to have a more fluid result. The way this moves, and then you can compare it to another project where something moves based off of the events code, and you can notice a slight delay. So using the sensing keys avoids a delay, makes the game faster. But yes, we did notice that, hey, our spaceship is kind of off the screen. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to motion, and as you've already explored many times, we have if on edge, bounce. So that has to be in the forever loop so that it can constantly be checking for the bounce. So we're going to click. Oh, and now we're good. But our spaceship is upside down. That means that we have to constantly make sure that our spaceship is pointing in a certain direction all the time. So we have point in direction 90. Again, we start with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, the 8th code is going to be point in direction 90. And as you saw, it just flipped over by itself. So we're going to have this and like this. Beauty. So this is our first spray, and it's actually completely ready. And if you notice the constants here, they're going from 7.5 to negative 7.5. Keep an eye on that, because if it's not, then you might be noticing that some discrepancies there. The next part that we can now work on is either the enemy or the laser code. So let's start with our enemy code. Typically, the enemy in Space Invaders looks something like this. This is your typical Space Invaders enemy. You can tell it's pixels. It's actually really easy to put together if you had the time to do that. If you want, you can also go into images and just download one or upload one onto Scratch. What we're going to do is we're going to use what we already have available and use that instead as an enemy. So you can click on choose a sprite, and you can choose whatever sprite you want. You can create a sprite. Or you can create, so let's see if we want to create one. In our picture there, we have one rectangle, and then we took circle, and placed them on top of each other, and then we made the whole thing separate color. Then decided to, so what I did was I created click on the square tool, pull out the rectangle, click the circle tool, and create an oval ellipse, an oval shape, and then just put them on top of each other. And we can add eyes to this if we want to. And make it different colors so that we can see it. And if I click on the select tool, click on the square, I can do Control C, Control V, and have two of those. And then if you really wanted to, you can make multiple versions of that. A happy face. So this happy face obviously isn't as even, but that's okay. Right, so if you're happy with this, you can keep going. Want to add anything? That's okay. So we're just going to make sure I select the whole thing and I make it slightly smaller and I center it to the compass in the middle here. Then finally, we want to make sure that we make our size smaller because this enemy is way bigger than the spaceship. So let's make it slightly smaller. If we make it 50, it's a nice size. Okay, excellent. So it's about the same size as my spaceship. So now that our costume is created, we can now click on the code. By the way, it's much more effective if you actually name your sprites the thing that they are. So sprite 2 here, the sprite that we're selected on, it's blue, it's this thing. The sprite is just called sprite 2, so that's not very effective. Let's just call it enemy. And this sprite, which is our spaceship, we click on it, we can click on sprite, insert a name, we can call this spaceship. All right. So what's the most important piece of code again? One green flag clicked. So let's click on one green flag clicked. And we want to set a certain XY position because remember, the spaceship starts at the bottom and this enemy starts at the top. And it has to be like that for the game to work. You can't have it the other way around. So that's why it's pretty important that you set them at the very beginning. So we go to motion. We have go to X is 14, Y is 42. If you're happy with that number, if you're happy with this position being in the upper section of your code, you can keep it. If you want to make it sure it's more centered, you can do that. I believe I made the other one 145, so I'll make this 145 as well. So we have it 145 to the top and 145 on the bottom for this. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to hide this code block. And the thing is, if I make it a 0, 0, what's going to happen is I'm going to create clones. And those clones are going to move a certain number of steps away from their home clone. So I'm not going to keep it at 0. In fact, I'm going to make it a very extreme negative number. X is negative 180. So it's going to start all the way here. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to looks and we're going to grab the hide command. So when we click the green flag, if you click the green flag right now, it's going to hide. But I don't want to do that because I want to make it more clear what I'm doing. So just don't click the green flag right now. And the moment has come for us to use the cloning feature. We're going to click Control, and we're going to click on Create Clone of Myself. If I just have one Create Clone of Myself, it's going to create literally just one clone. Let's remove the hide feature for a second. If I click Create Clone of Myself, click on the green flag, there's one of me. But because I want multiple, I'm going to do a repeat. So this create clone of myself, I want 5 clones, about 5 enemies. So I'm going to do that. But if you prefer to have more or less, go for it. It also depends on the size of your clones, right? Not everybody's is going to be the exact same. So if I create 5 clones, then I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a 6th basic home clone. So it is that basic home clone that I don't like having. That's why I use the hide command. But if you don't bother, like it doesn't make you a difference, you can keep it. You don't have to have the hide command. And we're going to go into motions and we're going to click on move, change X by 10. So it says 10. Obviously, we wanted to change by a different number, but let's do move instead. Let's do move 10 steps. We do to move 10 steps. Oops, let's get rid of the hide command. Sometimes to undo your code, you actually have to do the opposite code. So you have to click on show for it to show again. So pro tip. Now if I do that, you'll notice like a big block of this. It's because it moved 10 steps, but that wasn't enough for us to see it. So let's click on 80. All right, so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what happens usually is that the last one never fits. So that's why I typically hide it. All right, so that's the first part of this enemy. The second part we can only create when we are done making our laser. So we're going to pause for now with our enemy and we're going to work on our lasers. So let's choose a sprite, and let's click on the magnifying glass. So you can choose arrows here, like the up arrow, that'd be really cool. You can choose this diamond, you can choose whatever you like. I think I'm going to choose a wand. I think the wand concept looks really cool. But I am going to make it smaller because my spaceship is only like, the height of my spaceship is only this many pixels, and this one is like 3 times that. Let's make it 30. Size is 30. It's very tiny, never mind. Let's make it 50. A little bit more legible. It's 75. All right, there we go. I think I'm going to make the stick of this wand smaller. So I'm going to go to costumes. And I'm going to see if I can cut any of this. So click this. I can... I click here. I can click a portion of this. And I can remove it. So obviously, when the Scratch creators were making this, they made it in multiple steps. That's why it's a little more detailed. Like you can see all the refractions in the star. So when you click on the select tool, it's going to select all the little pieces, and then I only want half of them gone, so I clicked mostly on the bottom. Click on the backspace, and it'll be gone. So that's how you get this look. And that. Then just wanted to make sure that I center the star. There we go. And I think that's good. I want to change the color here to make it more legible, make it green. Okay, we'll do that. Now we're going to click on the code button, and we're going to grab in events on green flag clicked. Remember, for every single sprite, we set up the coordinates in a specific spot. For the star, though, it really depends on where the spaceship is. So we're not going to say in motions, go to a specific XY position. Instead, we're going to say go to random position, drop down, and grab spaceship. I want it to start wherever the spaceship is, and I want it to continue moving around wherever the spaceship is. Now let's focus on the cloning part first, and then we'll do a little detail step. So we're going to clone it first. Again, when we clicked on create clone of myself in control, we also know now that we need to have a loop. And I want it to loop, not forever, not 10 times, but when, if I do an if statement, it's only going to do it, it's not going to do it very continuously. So I want to actually select a forever loop, but create clone of myself in it. But what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put a slight condition. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the very, very top of the control. Wait 1 second, and well, not wait 1 second, sorry. There's 2 wait commands. At the very top, you have wait 1 second. But when you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down, you have wait until. In our forever loop, we're going to wait until key space pressed. We're going to wait until the space key is pressed. When that is pressed, we're going to create a clone of ourselves, or the laser is going to be cloned. And we want the whenever we do this, we don't want it to just create like this. We don't want the clones to be right on top of each other, so we're going to move them. What we're also going to do is that between every single clone, we're going to put a delay of 1 second. So we're going to have wait 1 second. Now, as a clone, what is it going to do? So we're going to go to controls and we're going to grab when I start as a clone. So clones have 2 parts. You have create a clone of yourself, and you have when I start as a clone, as well as delete this clone. So when I start as a clone, something should happen. We're going to click on the motion block, and we're going to click on go to Spaceship because we want the clone itself to start wherever the spaceship is. And we're going to grab in a forever loop the instructions of how it should move. So remember we talked about how the lasers have to move on the y-axis. So they're going to move up and down. Well, actually they're only going to move up. So we're going to grab change y by 10. So change y by 10 is in the positive direction. Now let's see how our clone works. Okay, check that out. This is working. So if we move to the right, moves to the right. Move to the left, moves to the left. This is pretty cool. Well done. The only thing is, though, we have this one laser just hanging here by itself. And typically, to avoid that situation, what I do is I just hide that initial laser because we don't really need it because we can clone as many as we want of it. So we're going to hide the first one. So that's why in our first part of the clone, you're going to put the hide command under go to spaceship, and then the show command after when I start as clone. So now we're going to do the spaceship, and then we're going to move here, and we have another one, and another one. There we go. Beautiful. So now we have all parts of our code working. But remember when I mentioned you have to have that sensing part? That's what we're going to do right now. We're going to figure out how we can make our enemy realize that it is touching the wand. All right. So to do that, we're actually going to code this part in the spaceship. Sorry, we're going to code this part in the enemy. So we're going to click on the enemy button where we already have half of our code there. Now, just like how in our wand we had when I start as a clone, we're going to have that in our enemy as well. So in control, we're going to grab when I start as a clone. And remember, when I started as a clone, it said hide. Now I want it to show. I'm going to go into looks, scroll down, and grab show. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into events, into control, and we're going to grab a forever loop because what we wanted to do is to continuously make a decision. What is that decision, you say? It's going to be an if statement that's going to see if it's touching the star. And it's pretty simple. In sensing, you just have touching mouse pointer. So we're not going to touch the mouse pointer, obviously. We're going to click on this little arrow, and we're going to have if touching spaceship. Okay, why is our enemy not there? There we go. If touch the spaceship, then we want to hide. We can either hide the code, the clone, or you could delete the clone, but I think it's a much safer to hide the clone. Okay, so we'll bring it back later. So let's attempt this. Oops, I forgot. If touching the spaceship, then hide. Let's try one more time. That's odd. It's not hiding. So maybe we have to debug our code a little bit. When I started as a clone, I wanted to show, and then I wanted to begin a forever loop where it's going to, oh, oops. I meant to say if you're touching the wand. So remember, we're coding this, I forgot. We're coding this in the enemy code. So if the enemy, the red blocks, touch the wand, then they should hide. I accidentally did if they were touching the spaceship, so that's not going to work, because that's never going to happen. There we go. Boom, boom, and they are deleted. Awesome. Okay. So that is how you make the most basic, yeah, okay. That is how you create the most basic version of Space Invaders. What we're going to do is we're going to spice it up a little bit and try to make it a little bit more interesting and immersive. Remember, you can do this by adding sounds and changing backgrounds, as well as changing a little bit of how the game works. So in traditional Space Invaders, the pieces actually move around. So let's see if we can figure out a way to make our enemies move around. We can go to X and Y. Perhaps we want to change X by random position. Glide 1 second to random position. Let's see how that would work. Oh, okay, interesting. So they are just like everywhere. So that makes it really cool. What we can do is we can put that in our forever loop. But now, doesn't work. I clone myself, move 80 steps. When I hit it, it disappears. A forever loop, once the clone starts, we can glide 1 second. Touched it, that didn't sense it. This makes the game more difficult, but I want to make sure that it's actually sensing the touch. Some of them are not. Let's try one more time. You saw a lot of the things, the wand touched a lot of them, but it didn't do anything. I don't know why that is. Glide 1 second. Say we did 0.5. Oh, so what happens is it's going to glide the whole 1 second and then it's going to do the decision. So if you want it to be more on the time, then it has to glide or fewer. Whoa. It has to glide slightly. It has to glide for a smaller amount of time. So if we glide 0.5 seconds or 0.75 seconds, slower. It's going to wait till its whole glide is complete. So maybe not glide, but change the order. Does that make a difference? No. If I want to glide, we could do change X. And we can change X by our spaceship position as well. Oh, that's a little weird. It's going to move in the same direction. Never mind. We have just changed X by 10. And then we have changed X by -10. what would happen? It wouldn't press. What we can do is we want to remove that and do if on edge bounce. So change x by 10, and then it's supposed to bounce back. No. So let's do move 10 steps instead. Okay. Interesting. So that makes our game look a lot more interesting. If you don't want them to be turned around upside down, we can do point in direction 90, right above our move 10 steps. So wherever, point in direction 90, all seem to turn, and then there we go. So I'm going to say that at this point, this is a pretty good Space Invaders game. Getting the last one will be a lot harder because you don't have the same speed as the enemy. But anyhow, this is the final complete version of our Space Invaders game. I've made it a little bit more complicated by making our spaceships move, our enemies move. As you saw in our Giphy, they didn't move before, so now they do. I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and if you need to catch up on any of the code, feel free to just rewatch the video and find the specific font that you need. But thank you for joining us, and see you next week for our next project.